Hey, everybody. Welcome to podcast number 2 for the Self Perfected podcast. This is the only podcast where you're going to hear things from the perspective that self perfection is even possible. We talk about self perfection on an individual basis, but also what does that look like in the world at large? Today's podcast is on the concept of principles versus feelings. We made this number 2 because we all agree this is a huge point within self-perfection. If you don't really get clear on what your principles are, self-perfection is not possible. So we're going to talk about that today and what's the relationship between living from principle versus living only from feelings, or putting those as the primary point of why you do things. But before I go too far, why don't I just jump into it, guys? So let's talk about this. Here's what I'd like to start with. What does it mean to live from feelings? So I think that's really the contrast, right? So we'll get to the principles in a second, but let's look at what does it mean to live by feelings? Who wants to take
Yeah,
that point?
I'll
Yeah,
take
go,
that
Jay.
on. When you're living by feelings, you just do whatever you feel like in the moment, or you're doing things because of a feeling that you're going to get later on, even. So, like, setting up basically your lifestyle so that you'll make a bunch of money so that then you'll feel really good because you have a bunch of money. That's living from feelings.
Mm.
And basically everyone lives by feelings. I don't know how early we want to get into this, but like, I was having a conversation with my mom yesterday, and we were talking about like, you know, everybody has this idea of like, uh, doing unto another as you want done unto you, or giving as you want to receive, and like, that's a principle. That's a good
Right.
principle,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
everybody has this idea of that, but they don't actually live that out. They do it when it's convenient for them, when it feels good. That's when they do it. They don't actually live by that. And it's funny. I was talking, as I was talking, she was saying, "Oh, yeah, if everybody were actually living that way, because everybody definitely agrees with that. I haven't met anyone who's like, no, you can't, you can't do unto somebody else as you want done unto you. You can't treat everybody or give as you want to receive. Nobody actually says that. Like they might say it's hard, but they all
Yeah.
agree it should be done. And then what she was saying was like, but if everyone were living that way, we'd have a completely different world, which is obvious, you know? And so the way I see it is living by feelings versus living by principle. And I know we haven't really gone into what principle is yet, but it's like you're just you might have some principles, but you're not living by them. You're allowing the feelings to dictate when you will choose to use those principles or not, which is not living by
Well,
principle.
so let me push back on it. So I'll play like the objection side of things, right? So
Yeah.
let's say somebody says, they're really religious, like they go to church every Sunday and all that stuff.
Yeah.
They read the Bible, and I'm just using that since that's one context for religion, right?
Hmm.
And they do all those things, and when they see a homeless person, they give them some money. They might donate to charity regularly, but otherwise they're just a normal person. They have a job, they have kids and so forth, they watch TV, just normal person,
Hmm.
right? How does that person still, how are they still living from feelings? Like, how could someone who's in that situation relate to the point of, okay, no, I mean, I have my principles, I'm living by principles. Maybe we should talk about principles, right? So you're giving a pretty good example of what feelings are, right? um, why don't we look at the principle point for a second? Can we agree also that we're not saying that no one lives from any principles, but what is the principle that most people are living from is my feelings matter more than anything else.
Yeah.
Agreed. Okay,
Yeah.
so the principle, if you were to look up the definition of it, it's just the starting point, the underlying reason for why you do something. Okay, so we'll get into later on what is our perspective in terms of what are the best principles to have, and we'll explain why we say they're the best. But the overriding principle that everyone seems to be operating from, or that we are operating from, is my feelings are the most important thing. But let's say you have somebody who says, okay, well, I saw this guy on the street, he was homeless, I gave him some money so that he'd have a little bite to eat or whatever, I'm a good person. Like, how am I living from feelings? Like, what would y'all say to that?
That's So that's delusional in the sense that you're you're feeling good in the moment because you gave that money, but you're not actually looking at the bigger picture of what's required to actually give as you want to receive, which that homeless guy, yeah, I'm sure he appreciates, the money here and there or the little bit of food, but that guy really wants a place to live, an opportunity to live a life that's fulfilling and where he can thrive and contribute to society. So that's real principle, is stepping up and looking at how do we change the system that's causing homelessness to happen or the wealth inequality. That's real principle, because I was the kind of guy who would give to the homeless guy driving by the street, and I still do at times, but it's much more from a starting point now of realizing I'm actually backing up what I'm talking about. I actually have initiatives to educate the people in the city, and that's what I do every day, and I pour into that. I'm not just giving out of I kind of feel bad, so I want to give him the money. It's like, now it takes on a whole new level.
Yeah,
What's interesting about that is, like, if you ever like go and talk to a homeless person, like even if you spend like, I don't know, just a minute talking to a homeless person, I've found a consistency within homeless people where they'll say like something to the effect of, the system doesn't care about me. Like they'll say like, the odds are stacked against me. It didn't work out. I did everything right, or, whatever their story is, but they always say to some effect, the system doesn't care about them. And it's like, they can't win. And to your point of like, just giving them money isn't really solving their problem. It's like the real principle behind that, or the principle of doing what's best for all, is really considering like creating a system where they don't have to be kicked out. If they choose to like go and be homeless, okay, fine. But like that, creating a system where they're actually supported would actually be doing more for them than just handing them a dollar bill.
Yeah, now we're kind of getting up against the point of, okay, but you guys are talking about changing the system, right? And then, there's going to be all kinds of cognitive dissonance that might come up in people's mind, or beliefs about how that can be possible, or what a system that takes care of everybody would look like, and so forth. But everything that we're sharing here is within the starting point of self-perfection, of actually looking at how things can be done in a way that's best for everybody, not compromising in any way. That doesn't mean we don't recognize that things can happen in stages and so forth, right? But I thought it was really cool what you were saying, Mitch, about, you could still give money to a homeless person if in that moment you can see like, okay, like the person's literally about to starve, I want to give them some money. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not about like just, screw everybody. But what I've seen, I saw it within myself, I see it within others who are honest enough to admit it. Like you were just saying, it's like, yeah, but really I wanted to feel like a good person, or many times I'm trying to avoid some negative feeling and then doing something that'll like switch that into a good feeling. So maybe someone can speak to that point of like how we will do things to avoid something negative, and then we'll say it's because we're a good person or this or that, but it's like really we're just trying to avoid something we don't want to happen. Can anybody relate to that?
So I want to paint it very clearly, and we'll definitely address that. But what we're talking about is, honestly speaking, an entirely new mode of being, where the mode of being has been do what feels right. Follow your feeling, follow your bliss, follow your bless.
Which is be less.
Be less. Be less. Oh shit. Follow your bliss, follow your passion, all that stuff. It's like we're talking about a completely new mode of being. And if you just want to figure out if it's a mode of being worth considering, well, look at where the first mode of being got us. Follow your feelings. Like, what is it, June 12th or something like that? 13th is like 2020, right?
Look at what's going on.
Look at what the hell is going on. And that is the result of everyone saying, my feelings matter most, and I need to change the world before I change myself, before I change how I feel, because how I feel is who I am. So I know we're going to get deeper into how principle and feelings relate to identity.
Let's just talk about that, because that there's so many people, you know, saying like we want to change the system is not something new. Okay, everybody's saying that. There's a lot of, not everybody, but a lot of people are saying this. And I'm really glad you're bringing up this point of like clarifying what it is that we're suggesting that's fundamentally different. And it really is fundamentally different than any other point, because if we just only say, well, we just got to change the system, if we're not being self-honest, it's not addressing the fact that we're changing the system in a limited way. We're only changing it so that we, in our little kind of special sort of self-interest or feelings or identity or whatever, that is kept intact. So we'll only allow changes that keep that, you know, starting point intact. And it's like, if we change the system from that perspective, all that's going to do is exclude some people and include some people. And that's what's always happened in the entire history that we have recorded of human history, is just a constant point of, okay, these people feel, you know, excluded, or they feel underprivileged, or they are underprivileged, or they don't have what they need. So let's change things so that they're included. But then these evil motherfuckers over here, let's kick them out and everything, and they're bad, and like, let's not even care about them. And really what we're talking about is we have to change the starting point of how we live and how our system operates to look at what's best for everybody. And that doesn't mean that people should feel bad or that we should ignore how people feel. But let's look at this point. How much of how we feel is actually created by a reaction to the fact that things are not best? Like, for example, like I'll give you just like a made up example here. Like, let's say you have somebody who was really heavily abused by their mother, like say a boy who was abused by their mother a lot. And so when they go out and they look for a partner, let's say that they're attracted to women, they're looking for a woman as a partner. They're going to look for somebody who is the opposite of their mom, let's say. And that person they'll just naturally feel good about that kind of person. But that may not actually be the best person, because they're associating particular characteristics with someone who abused them or whatever the thing is. And you can apply this to so many different examples and areas of life. And so many times where we're saying, my feeling is valid. Like you said, it's who I am. It's my identity. So let's now adjust society because I feel bad. Instead of, okay, how can we adjust things in a way where something like that was prevented? Like, let me ask you guys, what is the reason why a parent would abuse their child? What would be one reason?
They were abused themselves.
Okay, they were abused themselves. What else?
They don't know any better.
They don't know any better. I mean, I'm a parent myself, right? I have 2 kids who are young, 1.5, 3.5. And you look at the stress, like imagine having to go to work 2 jobs and not get paid very much. And so every time your child asks you for something at the store, you have to be like, no, and you don't want to say, what were you saying, Asif?
It's just like you start thinking like all the things that run through you in terms of money, access,
emotion, feeling, everything comes. Yeah. And you're stress, like, oh, bills. And then what parents will do, because they don't want to maybe say, oh, well, we don't have enough money for it. It's like, well, you already had a toy last week. So, but it's like, think about that. You're programming your child to believe like you can only, like, there's lack. You know what I mean? Even though they see all these toys and they're like,
the fuck?
What? And they might see other kids who just get whatever they want. And they're like, why am I not deserving? And they're not even clear on what's going on. No one's explaining all of that. So they're just starting to create this feeling of like not deserving stuff. And then that will turn into like this complex of emotion and thought and feeling, which will then dictate decisions in their lives and in their life, which then they'll try to protect. Right. I mean, you can apply this to so many different areas. So yeah, go ahead, Asif. Yeah.
So like when we bring that up, because what I actually want to focus on for the first bit is like hammering the destruction if you just follow feelings. So like Mitch, if you go back to who you were a year ago, 2 years ago, and I was like, Mitchell, where do your feelings come from? Where do your emotions come from? If you put yourself in the average person's position, what would you say?
Where do my feelings and emotions come from? I would say,
like, what do you think the average person would say?
Like you would have said, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be like, well, they just come from me, doing the right thing. Like if I just think in the right way and I just do the right thing and build a habit out of.
But what about like when you get angry and things like that? Even the bad stuff. Like, where do all the feelings come from?
It's just this.
Like, nobody knows.
Or you will say like, well, I'm just a flawed person. We're all humans. We're all weak. We all flawed. Like, we're all
Or they come from some divine.
Which is like original sin.
That's
like
karma
to us.
Something like
karma.
that.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of.
The point is,
I need to learn the lesson. Maybe that's
that's another one.
Nobody knows. Nobody's actually acknowledging that like Where do your thoughts come? I remember, Cameron, you asked me like, okay, where do your thoughts come from? I'm like, they come from God. It comes from the like they you know what do you mean? What do you mean? Where do your thoughts come from? That's a stupid question, But it's like now I can explain it very clearly. But the point being that we don't even choose our feelings. What Cameron was just saying, of giving that example, that's a little example of how feelings are actually built into you, that they are given to you through you watching a cartoon when you were a kid and then laughing at the kid who like does something silly.
Yeah.
Right. Or, farts. And now everybody's laughing at farts. So farts are funny now.
Yeah.
Like, well, farts are just funny.
But like, are they?
You were that.
It's
like, where did you get that from? Right.
Right.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
Your
like farts are just funny,
that.
And we don't question
somebody
it.
taught you that.
Yeah.
Your uncle, who was always like, you can make fart arms with your fart sounds with your arms, so it's funny. And don't get me wrong, same thing for me. But the point is like we don't even choose our feelings. Everyone's like, yo, think for yourself. Think for yourself. Be an independent thinker. Stop playing into. You're just following blah blah blah, right? It's like, aren't you just following your feelings, which you don't even know where they come from? How does that make any sense? But that's the mode of being right now. I remember Cameron a long time ago. We were discussing this thing called fuzzy logic. And it's actually like a thing.
Yeah.
And tell me if this is an apt description. This is my understanding is like logic where you have parameters set as to your line of thinking or operating. But the thing is that those parameters move. They're moving based on how you feel. Where it's like, I'll work out if I feel like it that day.
There's like a threshold. If I feel enough, right?
Yeah. And it's like you're leaving way too much variable space to actually to make it very simple. It's like you don't know why you feel what you feel, where it came from. And don't worry, we have solutions to that. I'm not just making you feel bad about that. We'll tell you how to work through that stuff. But it's really to acknowledge that if you are following your feelings and following your emotions, you are not independent. You are not a quote unquote free thinker.
Yeah.
You are not leading yourself.
Yeah.
Right? The example you gave, Asif, about going to the gym is a really good example, because why do people go to the gym? You could have reasons for like, you want to look great and all this other stuff. So there could be feeling points associated with it. Right. But that aside, let's just say it's purely because it's for your fitness, like to actually support your body, feel good, have good health so you can function effectively and be your best, right? Which is one of the principles that we're going to talk about later, right? Is having that as a goal of treating your body with respect and so forth, right? Imagine one day you wake up and you don't want to go to the gym, and so you don't go, and then you feel bad about it, and then you don't go the next day because you feel bad and you're like, it's too hard and all this stuff, right? Now, assuming you were going to do the best thing for your body by going, when you choose the feeling over what would be best, that's an example of what we mean by feelings versus principles versus feelings. Now, we haven't yet really talked about what are the specific principles, but if you're making a difference between principles versus feelings, we can start looking at it from the perspective of, okay, well, it is best for me, so I'm going to do it even if I don't feel good. But I want to take that one step further for a moment, just to kind of bring us back to the whole point, which is like when we have systems in our world that feed people or don't feed people. Okay, so why are there homeless people, for example? Why are there people who don't have enough food? If we're living our lives individually based on whether I'll go to the gym or not, based on a feeling, or whether I'll go to work or not, or whether I'll do X, Y, or Z, like whether I'll buy this particular product because of how it makes me feel at a level I'm not even consciously aware of. But that is, so it's like, even if you don't feel it and you're not conscious, doesn't mean it's not happening. Like you might buy a particular pair of headphones because you like that color because of something you're associating it with that you're not even aware of. But if we're making decisions, so anyone can, I think, relate to that at some level, right? We make decisions, and you might not realize how every decision you make is that way, but it's like you can relate to specific points. But how easily, let's just say we can easily see how easily we make decisions based emotionally. then the systems that are kind of running things at a much higher, bigger level than any of us individually are doing. Like I'm not determining on meaning I'm not sitting here today determining whether people in Ethiopia have food or not, right? Meaning I'm not directly making that decision right now, like pushing the button whether they get food or not. But the systems that I'm participating in, which is food, which is based on money, and that money system is connected with the money system in Ethiopia and the economics and the banking and all these things, which is determining whether there's value placed in that market or not, or whatever the thing is. Those things we're allowing based on us just only focusing on our feelings on a day-to-day basis. So we're not like, okay, my feelings aside, what is going on in this world that's actually harming people that I'm benefiting from, you know? And that's really where the concept of privilege comes in, is that we don't even in the first world consider how we have access to systems that we benefit from, even if we're on the short end of the stick in the first world. That is like the people in other countries would look at and go, oh my God, they live like kings. And like literally all you do is sit around, eat fast food, and like, cause that's all you can afford. And they're like, wow, amazing, you know? Right. And that doesn't mean that there aren't that someone in the third world values every single thing that we have that might not be best for us, but it's just a point of contrast. Meaning we all take, not all of us in the first world, but many of us take, let's say, clean drinking water for granted.
Yeah.
You know, but even in the first world, there's parts where that breaks down.
Yeah.
There's so many examples, and we couldn't possibly go through every single example, but you could start looking for yourself. It's like we are allowing a world that we're a part of, a reality that we're a part of, where some people, many people actually, the majority of people actually are not getting what they need to have the best possible life. So even the concept of self-perfection is totally outside of what is even considered possible by them. But this is where self-perfection takes a detour from self-improvement. Because do we want to improve ourselves? Absolutely. Yeah. Everybody is like, yeah, I want to be better. I want to have more money. I want to have better relationships, all that stuff, everything you would think of within self-improvement. But let's go one step beyond and say, okay, but what's the starting point of why I am improving myself? Because I could improve myself to become, you know, the best MMA fighter. I could improve myself to become the best athlete, the best, you know, guy at making money, or the best, you know, guy at, you know, on TV, or whatever the thing is. But does that actually improve lives for everybody else? And to get my goal, do I have to accept systems that are directly creating the poverty and creating the lack of clean drinking water, the lack of nutrition, or all those points? Right. So you guys see any other, because I want to make sure that it all kind of ties together. Do you guys see any other points on the point of feelings versus principle? Do you guys want to talk about what principle is? Where do you want to go here from here?
This is kind of a point that Mitch and I were talking about yesterday when we were looking at the principle of best for all, right? And you know, why don't we just go into that principle? Because when
start us off, Jake.
Yeah, so like when you're looking at that principle of best for all, it's like guiding myself in thought, word, and deed to always and always direct all things to the best possible outcome for all. But then after that, there's like two more paragraphs, like taking into consideration the effects of my thoughts, words, and deeds on the world around me, people, plants, animals, environment, and ensuring that the thoughts, words, and deeds I am living honor the best potential of myself and all of life on earth to the best of my ability, and standing unconditionally in the shoes of all people and all things, and being able to, at the end of the day, say that I have fully considered all within the context of creating the best possible outcome for everyone and everything, that I have honored and considered them in the way that I would like to be honored and considered. I think there's just so much context there that needs to be taken into account, because, and I love it, as I was telling Mitch, because to me, it's a promotion for TechnoTutor. Because if you can't even process what's going on, like, you know, in your textbooks, or, you know, in whatever you're reading, or, you know, just process your daily life, you can't possibly consider like the context of what somebody else is going through in another country, and how what you're participating in here is influencing that, like what you just described, how all the systems that we take advantage of here, that we just take for granted, are also taking advantage of those other countries and making it so that they don't have the resources or the capability to have the same life that we have, that we just take for granted, you know? And so it's, what I see within that is everybody, I think, would say, you know, yeah, of course we want to do what's best for all. But I remember for me personally growing up, and I know many people have had this experience of asking, why are there starving kids over there? Why is this way? If God loves me, then why did he make you such a bitch? You know, like those kinds of questions. And the answers that I would get would be like, well, it's too complicated. You don't understand. They didn't understand.
That's just how the world works.
That's just how the world works. Exactly. But the reason why people say that is because it's so complicated for them to be able to put all those pieces together that they're just like, fuck it. It's overwhelming. I give up. It's just how it is. You can't fix that. That's the portion where people believe that you can't get to that level of perfection within the system, you know?
Yeah, that's a great, okay. I want to interject on that point. Perfection in the system. That's perfect the way you said it. What would perfection in the system be? One example would be everybody has enough food. Okay. And so I guess I didn't really complete this train of logic previously, but instead of it like, well, if we value these people, then they might get it. Or if we feel like making sure they get the food or not, rather it's like, no, regardless of how any human being on the planet feels, everybody has enough food. That would be, in that context, perfection in that system. So perfection is a program, which means it's predictable. It's always going to give you the result you want. That's if you wrote a computer program that sometimes worked, that wouldn't be perfect, would it? If it every single time gave you the exact result you wanted, you'd be like, okay, that program is perfect. I trust it. I just know it works. That's how we want the systems that produce food, that distribute food, that clean drinking water, education, all these points. It sounds like you want to say something, or it looks like you want to say something.
Yeah. You know what I just realized?
What?
We take prisoners, like the worst people in our society, and we make sure they're fed every day. Like it might be shit food, but we make sure they're fed, they have water, they
Bars.
Isn't that fucking crazy? Like we value those people over people that, you know, we've never heard of, who have never been in our society, whatever. Like, but that's fucking weird.
You know, it'd be interesting. Maybe somebody can look it up while we're talking. But what does it cost per prisoner? Like, what do we spend per prisoner on average in the U.S.? And I wonder how that compares to like the average income in the U.S. That would be. And we talked about this. I think we talked about this on
Mitchell. Are you going in right
1.
now? Mitchell, you're checking.
Yeah, I'm looking.
I don't know if we talked about this, but the average, or what income puts you in the top 1% globally?
Oh yeah,
we haven't touched on that.
We haven't talked about that.
This.
No. That was another conversation we were having.
Okay.
Okay.
That was part
here
of
we
it.
go.
Yeah.
According to Vera Institute of Justice, incarceration costs an average of more than $31,000 per inmate per year nationwide. In some states, it's as much as $60,000.
60,000?
In some states. So on average, it's 31,000.
Dude, they're making more than the. Okay, now we should look up. We should look it up now.
Yeah. That's
Mitch,
fucking
can you also
crazy.
look up the stat for what would put you in the top 1% of the globe if you were making this amount of annual income?
Yeah.
Hang on, I think I have a link for it somewhere.
Did you have
here.
that link that we found? Yeah.
And just to accentuate, while you guys look that up, just
Yeah.
to accent what Cameron was saying about, should we determine who to feed based off how we feel about that person? It's like, imagine if your calculator worked based off feeling. And you put in like 1 + 1 equals, and then you hit equals and it was like 2. You hit 1 + 1 and it was like, I feel like 5 today. 5 is my favorite number.
Sad emoji.
So I'm going to put.
Well, that's what that fuzzy logic you were talking about is.
Yeah.
Is that
it's like 5 is actually my favorite number. So
that.
Yeah. And so it's like, that's a very simplified form of saying that when you put an equation into something, you expect a certain output. In the same way we use the toaster example of, if, I have a digital toaster, and if you set it to 5, generally speaking, the toast comes out perfect every time. Versus if I set it to 5 and I put a toast down and it comes out burnt, and then other time it comes out undercooked, and then I'm returning that toaster. I don't want that toaster, right? And the beautiful thing is, with a system or perfection, it doesn't matter who's doing it. Anybody can apply that. Anybody can apply it. Any country can apply that, right? Any individual can apply that. So when we self-perfected.com, it'll have the link to the principles, the processes that we do in order to
well, let's just go ahead and make that link right now. So
so it's self-perfected.com/principles, PRINCIPLES.
So we're going to put the principles that we're talking about today there, and with some links from where we get them from. Also, I was going to say too, and you guys can tell me what you think, but I think, we may or may not get to all the principles today and like discuss them all.
Probably
that's
not.
Also why we're going to have them there, but it's like they're in order of sort of what's the first point you need to consider, and then kind of going from there. So that's where we're starting with number one.
Just to go back on that point that Mitch had made, as far as what was it? How much was it per inmate in the U.S.?
31,000.
31,000.
Up to 60,000.
Up to 60,000. Okay. So by global standards, America's middle class, really rich. To make it into the richest 1% globally, all you need is an income of around $34,000. So to be in the top 1% globally, you only need $34,000. That means that basically we're looking at like you're in the top 3% globally if you're in the prison system in
basically,
the US.
Even if you're in prison in the first world, you're in the 1%.
That's fucking crazy.
If you raped, murdered, stole, right, you get treated than generally speaking, all of the world.
Now, I know a lot of people are going to react and be like, thinking, because the cognitive dissonance will come forward and they'll be like, so you're saying that everyone who is a prisoner should just feel good about where they're at and they're like rich. I'm like, no. We're saying that's a fucking problem. Okay.
Yeah,
like,
that's awful.
Not good at all. Right. So
what we're saying is that everybody in the world should have access to what murderers and rapists have access to in our fucking world. It's actually crazy.
Well,
I've never thought about it from this.
Food, they have clothing, they have all these points, right?
Like, is that so hard to, you know what I mean? But what it actually comes back to is us as individuals, because we're so fixated on our feelings, being able to prioritize your feelings as what we focus on, that's a fucking luxury. Because in other countries, if you didn't want to walk 5 miles to get your water or go to school, guess what? You're not drinking that day. You're not getting an education that day. You're not getting food. They don't have the luxury to focus on feelings. To be able to focus on our feelings is a luxury, but we abuse it.
And Asif, your family's from Guyana.
Guyana, yeah.
Drake, I know you have some family from Dominican, right? Maybe Asif, to kind of complete that thought, because are you just talking hypothetically here? Do you know what I mean? Like, is this just theoretical, or is it like really there are people? I mean, because we were in the Dominican, 2 years ago? Yeah. 2.5 years ago, something like that altogether. And of course we're going to like the resort, but you have to drive through the poverty.
It was a year and a half. Yeah.
It was a year, something like that. Yeah. You have to drive through the poverty. You have to drive through, you see like the prostitutes, you see the young guys just sitting on milk crates doing nothing. They're not sitting there in luxury. I don't know what Guyana's like. I've never been there. I don't know anything about it really.
There's obviously different parts, but even my own personal family between Guyana and there's 3 countries beside each other.
Which is, it's right
South
north
America.
of Brazil, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Beside Venezuela. And there's Guyana, Trinidad, and Suriname. And I have family all throughout that. And for example, in Suriname, which is very similar to Guyana, it's like my family don't even have toilets that flush.
Really?
Well, yeah, like you go to their house and it's pretty cool because like they're building out their house where they're like, we're just gonna add a new room because we just somebody else in our household now. And what I'm saying is that what they have to focus on is not getting robbed or killed. Like, for example, one of my cousins, in order to make enough money to take care of his family, he's just one of he's the oldest brother. He goes from Suriname to Guyana, which is basically illegally, in order to defend a gold mine where he then gets paid in gold. But his job is to kill anybody who comes by, or at least scare them away. He has a 12 gauge shotgun where every day he can die. just to bring enough money home, sell the gold, bring enough money home to maybe one day put in a flushing toilet.
Whoa.
Yeah. And I remember when I was there 2 years ago, it was like, you know, you become fixated from the point of sadness of like, oh my God, like this is the reality. But you don't fix homelessness by giving money to homeless people. You don't fix worldwide poverty by going there and just giving everybody money. Because what do you know deep down, if you're honest? Not every homeless person, because there is that one homeless person that will take it and, you know, make something of themselves. But generally speaking, if you give a homeless person $20, what are they spending it on? Right? We don't even have to answer the question, but everybody should know the answer to that.
Yeah.
And it's like, what would be actually best for them? What they need is something far more than just giving them $20 fucking dollars or $5 to give them, because you know they're going to be there next week, next month, right?
Well, I mean, also, doesn't that require you to go to work and then make money and then go give it to them? Mm-hmm. So is that even really what you want to do? And if you really cared, wouldn't you just like only have wouldn't you just have the bare minimum you could possibly live off of and give all your money away to everybody else? So if you take it to its logical conclusion, it doesn't really even make sense. And then that's not even considering, why is the person actually homeless?
Yeah.
There could be a lot of reasons why, you know, and it might be because of mental illness. It might be because of some kind of trauma they had in their life, and they can't handle the pressure of, you know, maintaining a job or something. It could be they just want to live out on the street. Sure, I'm sure those people exist. But I did this, you know, volunteer thing when I was younger, where we would go to here in Houston, and we would go and look for young people that were on the streets, you know, teenagers and so forth. And we would give them like, you know, kind of like little care packages with some food and also some not razors, but like just like sanitation type stuff, you know, and whatever. Help them get IDs, because they would always lose their IDs, and that was like a thing. They were always trying to steal each other's IDs and shit, and it's like really hard to get one. And you can't get services if you don't have an ID and all this stuff. And it was interesting because one of the things that we did was we would help them go through the system and get like housing. But then as soon as they would get an apartment, they'd have their friends over, they'd take a bunch of drugs, they'd trash the place, they'd get kicked out. So, you know, that doesn't mean it's all their fault. But what I'm saying is they weren't within themselves, all the stuff going on inside of themselves couldn't maintain that point effectively. Part of the problem though is when you look at political sides, you know, and political arguments, there's a side who says, well, they just need to learn about hard work and discipline, but that's not taking into account, okay, all of the programs and beliefs and feelings that are causing them to think that this is a good idea. Like, okay, I just got a house, let me throw a house party with everyone doing heroin. Like, that's not a good idea, but it feels good. And so the same reason why they're on the street in many cases, well, I really in all cases, although it's not the exact same point, is that they're there because their feelings are causing them to be there. You see what I mean? Because they can't. Now, there's other aspects to it too. They may not have the education level required to be in a certain job or something, right?
Yeah.
But then, of course, the argument would be, well, they just discipline themselves and get that education. Yes, but their feelings are all kind of fucked up and telling them to don't do that. You can't do it. You're an idiot. You know, whatever the thing is. So even in that example, we can see where the feelings come in and they cause problems. And we're not looking at, okay, if I'm in a position where I could possibly do something, maybe even at some point where I could make a difference in that, wouldn't that be something I would want to do? Even if it's just giving permission to it. Like, let's just say someone gave you the option to vote for a system that really took everything into account. And I know that's going to get into all kinds of fears about something like communism or socialism or all this stuff. That's not anything we're talking about. And I know we'll do future episodes specifically on, okay, what would that system look like in this context or whatever. But you know, why don't we go back real quick to the principle of best for all? Let's just really get this point clear.
Yeah.
You know, and so again, now everyone knows, okay, you could be looking this up on the website that we have to see what are these principles. You can kind of read along and so forth. But what does it really boil down to from my perspective, and maybe you guys can share also, is like, are you really considering what's best for everybody? And let me ask y'all this. Who here before, like when you were introduced to this concept, was like, well, how do you know what's best for other people? Anybody?
Yeah.
How did you overcome that objection within yourself? Or what was not like, what did someone say to you, but like within yourself, your own reasoning process? Why is that not a valid objection? Or is it possible to know what's best? Like, what's your take on that, Drake?
Oh, definitely. When I look at what's best for all, I just look at what I would want for myself or for my potential children, my family members, what I would want for them as far as what they're able to do and
But hold on, but does that mean like if you like a particular type of car, everyone should have that car? Is that what you're saying? Or if you like this type of food or this type of music or whatever, everyone should do that?
So,
like,
so let's talk about
definitely
equality
Right,
to specify
exactly.
equality. If it's like we want everybody to be equal, and the reaction is like,
Well, does that mean
we're not all the
same?
same? We're not all the
Right.
same. Like, how could we be?
How can we be equal?
Right.
So
from that perspective,
Yeah.
you know, obviously, no, we're not talking about like providing them a certain car, or providing them like a specific food or anything, or you only get this amount of food, but everyone gets the amount of food that they need in order to live healthily and nutritiously. And
it might be different depending on your body.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Sure.
Like I may not process beef, somebody else may not process chicken. Well, we
Yeah.
shouldn't be forced to eat the same thing, for example, or some chemically grown thing that some other person just thinks we should have, or whatever the case is. Like it actually should be figured out. Is it best? Okay, so then what do you mean when you say what I would want?
What I mean is
how do you
like
personalize what I would want so that it works for another person.
easy. I mean, that for me is like the really simple stuff. It's like, okay, I know I would want clean water. Like nobody would disagree with that, right?
Yeah, good point.
I know I would want healthy food, like we spoke about before, and like, you know, what I want to eat may be different than what you want to eat, and that's fine. But like, as long as it's food that's actually supporting my body to be healthy, you know, best for all would not be McDonald's for everybody by any stretch of the imagination.
But also, look, what does it take to create a McDonald's hamburger?
A lot of chemicals.
Well, but also like low wage, basically like wage slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is it so from that perspective, you have to look at, okay, is my like if I say, well, I want McDonald's. Well, first of all, is it possible to actually want something that's not best for you? Or is it there's probably some kind of feeling based thing going on there where you're not thinking clearly about it, or maybe just lack of understanding. But also, if what I want, let's just say it's just a matter of preference, like, you know, just what I prefer. Well, if what I prefer means somebody else has to have what's less than best, or they have to be in a situation I would like, what I want to work at McDonald's for my whole life? No. So is it okay for me to want McDonald's then? Is that okay? Is that acceptable? It's not about right or wrong moral shit. It's just like, is it acceptable for me to want that as a preference? Or, you know, it's like I think we mentioned this on another chat we had where somebody's like, well, if I don't have any feelings, I'm just like a robot.
Yeah, I want to address that too.
Well, I'll make this point, but I want to then I'll throw it to you. But it's like, isn't the need for having feelings to decide what you do like being a robot, being a program? What's your take on that, Hasid?
You guys ever hear in like the context of a relationship when someone like someone says to the other person, "You really know how to push my buttons."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like a robot. I get it. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, if there's something that happens and then you have a very predictable reaction to it, this A happens, B happens every single time. That is what's I was going to say that's what's perfected in you. There's two ways that we can talk about perfection. One of them is predictability. If a toaster runs perfectly, it gives me the same outcome every time. And then there's also perfect as the ideal, as what would be best, as that principle that we're talking about. But 99.5% of us and this world is automated. Like when we go to take a shit, we don't have to think about that being taken care of. Like you're not pooing in a cup and you're okay, I gotta like take this cup out later, or should I add it to the poo and then keep it for a week? But what happens if I keep it for? You don't have to think about any of that. You don't have to think about water coming to your house. You don't have to.
And most people don't even know how it works.
Yeah,
they don't. Like, they
100%.
literally couldn't think about it if they wanted to. They don't even know.
Exactly, right? And yeah, we'll get more into in the future about how this world.
Well,
is
I bring
just
it
a
up because,
reflection.
like, Max asks me, like, when he's uses the toilet, my 3.5-year-old, for those who don't know, he's like, "Hey, Dad, where does the water go? Where does it come from?" So we open up the toilet, we look at it, I show him the pipes there, and we go underneath. I explain there's pipes in the house, like where the water comes from.
Mm.
And also, just real quick, I wanted to make this point because I was thinking about earlier is, when we were talking about the homeless stuff, right? And like, why does homeless people exist? Max asks us that.
Mm.
Yeah.
I remember when he was very young, he asked us, I'm saying like around 2.5, something like that, or even younger. He would say like, why is that person standing there?
Yeah.
Because he just is like, something is in his environment. He's like, why is that person there?
Yeah.
And we say, oh, that person is homeless or they're begging for money. We explain to him. And he says, why? And we say, well, and we would explain to him, the system we live in is based in a certain way. Not everyone has enough money. Why not? Because blah, blah, blah. And we would explain. And to the point where, like, we're not covering anything up for him. And somebody say, oh, you shouldn't explain that stuff to a 2-year-old. But this is why when you're 15, 20, you don't understand because no one explained it to you. They just told you, well, it's just the way things are. Like, in other words, we will explain to Max, this is the way things are, but here's how it could be different. And that's what me and Mom and all the people we know are working on. So now when you talk to him, he'll say that. He'll be like, oh, I see a homeless person, Dad. I'm like, yeah. And I said, why are they there? He's like, because of the money. Like, he'll say it and he'll be, but you and Mom are working on that. Like, he is understanding that perspective, right? So we're not creating him any sense of like fear of homeless people, but we're not also stupid. Like, oh yeah, you just go up to any random person and like, like you don't
give
go
him a hug and
tiger's cage or whatever.
Yeah.
No, you might. It depends on the context. It depends on reading the situation and so forth, right? So that's really removing the feeling about it, because as a parent, you're like, well, so here's a perfect example. I don't want to teach my child that the world is unfair. I don't want them to look down on homeless people. I don't want blah, blah, blah. It's like, why?
Because they feel bad thinking about it.
Right. You're are feeling bad. And I'm going to now actually impose that. So what you don't realize is by trying to not put it on your child, you're putting it on your child because you're still accepting it. Instead of, it's like there's this famous saying in somewhere, I don't know who said it, but they say be in the world, but not of the world. Right. And so it's like, look, yes, none of us are sitting here going, well, I don't use money. I don't participate in this system. Ha ha, I'm so great. Like, it's not about moral superiority. It's about, yeah, we all have to use money. We're all in this system. But are we going to, number one, use that as an excuse, or number two, allow our fears and our own beliefs and all this shit to limit us from standing up and making a difference in that? We will talk about how our perspective on how to do that. But obviously, if a person listening to this conversation is stuck on the point of, well, it doesn't feel right, or they, like, in other words, when we say feelings, some of you guys think, but I think we're using that as sort of a catch-all phrase for also thoughts, emotions, beliefs.
Yeah.
Right. Because if, like, in other words, if we can't change the world because, you have to work for what you get. That's maybe not a feeling, although there is probably a feeling aspect to it, but it's also like a belief. Someone told you that the top 0.0001% in this world don't work. They don't experience work. They just have fun creating shit. It's just that it only really benefits them.
Yeah.
Right. But let's go back real quick, unless anybody had any specific points they wanted. I know I kind of interrupted what you were saying, Asif.
Did you want to add something?
Who?
Mitchell? Okay. But anchoring that point is really like, it isn't the lack of emotion that makes you a robot. It is your reaction that produces thoughts and emotions and feelings. That's what makes you a fucking robot. That's why it's something Cameron explained to me. It was like, think about the word react. Meaning again. If you're redoing something, you're doing something again. If you're reacting, you're just acting again. That's a robot.
Yeah.
If I start yelling the N-word right now, I know this is controversial, right? But if I start yelling that right now, maybe not you guys, but anybody listening to this will be like, whoa, what the hell is he saying right now?
Yeah, if they react massively. And
the point is, just to be clear, I'm not doing that, okay? But notice how I can predict that. And I'm not a super genius, I promise. What I'm saying is, there's a lot of things inside of us that we are programmed with to produce a reaction, to get you to feel something that you're not directing. And if we just focus in on home, I know we've been talking a lot about homelessness, and there's a reason. It's because that shouldn't exist.
Well, it's also in our faces all the time.
Exactly, right? And nobody really talks about it because it's like just avoid them,
right?
Whatever. Homelessness is a sort of perfection of our system. Mm-hmm. They are outliers, but our system that we live in systematically produces outliers. Like there's the product of our system and CEOs and blue collar workers and, cleaning people and all, accountant, all this stuff, and homeless people. Like that is an output of our system. Exactly. It's like our system is working perfectly. People say, Karen, I remember this is something you said, is like, people say, we got to fix the system. It's not broken.
Right.
It's not broken. It's like, it's doing exactly what it's designed to do. Separating everybody, right? Among other things, right? But it's not about fixing it. It's about changing what it is producing, changing the system so that the output is different. And the reason why Cameron mentioned at the start, the reason for this podcast is because if you perfect yourself, you will understand how to perfect this globe step by step.
If you even just consider that it's possible.
First step.
And it's like, if going back to the way you were using the word perfection, and we've been talking about, it's like, what if it's the program that's the problem, the principles upon which the program is running? And before we go back to talking about the principles specifically, because there's something I realized, if you're looking at this conversation and you might be like, well, I mean, feelings is who I am. It's what I am. What is the solution? Like, I mean, I'm not talking about the whole big picture, the whole thing. I'm saying, what's a simple point? What is something that, well, I'll just say it. There is a possibility that you can change that. Okay. So in other words, if someone's feeling like, well, I mean, if I can't operate based on feelings, what the hell can I do? If you can entertain the idea that the feeling is actually a program itself that's been placed in you, then is there a way to delete that program? And that's the concept.
Just to clarify really quickly, of like a program, what is a program? It's like, if you go on your computer, you click on it and it runs every single time, right? Just to clarify, a program.
Well, and you said it really well earlier. You said about pushing people's buttons.
Yeah.
Right. I was thinking, self-perfected is like the Apple of self-development, because we're showing you how to remove all the buttons. I'm holding up my iPhone here for everybody can see. Right?
Touchscreen.
That's really what we're saying, though, is like, okay, it's not about, and here's the thing too. The idea that you're afraid of being a robot, just a robot, is actually a fear. It's a feeling, and that's keeping you from the self-honesty that, guess what? You are a robot. We are robots. Like, we are, like, look at your body and think about this. What is it that scientists in the labs right now are trying to create? Aren't they trying to create robots that look just like us?
Yeah.
Like, don't they even see it's possible? Like, they see it's possible. Maybe it's not practical right today, but they see it as a possibility of, like, we can create a robot that acts exactly like a human being, looks like them, functions like them, everything, but they won't have the feelings and the emotions. So that's where what makes us different. And it's like, well, do animals have feelings and emotions? I mean, I've seen animals take care of each other. I've seen those videos where the dog pulls the other dog out of the harm's way. So they act in compassionate ways and so forth, but are they actually but what is an actual feeling and emotion in the context of what we're talking about? It's that point of weakness where you compromise doing what's best for this feeling you experience inside, either as a positive thing or what, like, you feel a negative and you're trying to get rid of that and feel the positive part. And I mean, even though you can't see it, if you just kind of look at it for a moment, can you see that it's actually a form of, like, electricity? It's like a form of energy. And if you study the science of it, okay, and this is also, look, here's one of the major problems, guys. Most people don't have the vocabulary to even really understand just actually what's going on in their body. So they might think what I'm saying right now is some esoteric, like, wait a second, you're saying feelings are just like energy inside of you. It's like, well, did you study physics? Like, did you study neuroscience? Like, I've read the textbooks. You have neural pathways, and there's like a gap in your neurons where information has to go from one side to the other. Do you know how it does that? There's an electrical impulse on one side, and then it releases chemicals which go across that gap to the other side where they're received, which changes the polarity, the electrical polarity in the cell, which passes that electrical polarity on. It's like you're literally operating based on an electrical principle, just like a robot. But imagine when you're born into this world, to a large degree, a lot of that is kind of all out in the open as to how those neurons are going to be programmed. And your environment, your parents, and then like the media that you're exposed to, also your nutrition levels. If you don't have proper nutrition, you'll only advance to a certain point, like neurologically, certain developmental things won't happen if you don't have the right, nutrition. Like I even heard someone talking about, and I don't know how accurate this is, but it seems to make sense, that the reason why we have problems with our wisdom teeth is not because wisdom teeth are a mistake. It's because over time, we've been so exposed to low mineral and vitamin nutrition that our jaws and everything have developed in a way where we can't hold our wisdom teeth effectively. So they're causing us problems. And like, if we had proper, like real proper nutrition over generations, like our jaws and our mouths would develop in a way where that wasn't actually a problem. So just one example. So you can see how that could happen, like where your cortical development in your brain or something could be affected. And they've shown this, in studies and so forth. What was the point I'm making here? anybody know
that we're wired like robots? Right, anybody being afraid of being a robot is.
So let's instead of saying like let's just get rid of our emotions and feelings and you have to be like a robot, let's acknowledge the fact that we are robotic in the sense that, like, okay, when you breathe, do you make yourself breathe? Or is there a system inside of your body with your lungs and your blood vessels and all this stuff that your body's automatically breathing, your heart's beating, your digestion is working? It's like a program, even though it's in flesh, it's not like, in computer circuits, that's causing all that stuff to happen. You wouldn't say, well, I don't want to be like a robot, so I'm going to just stop all those systems from running perfectly. And I'm going to direct every single little thing going on inside of me. And so when you look at how much we're actually consciously aware of that's going on inside of our body, it's very little. So whenever we have a thought or a feeling and we're like, that's me, it's like, that's like such a tiny little percentage of what you physically are. Why are you identifying with that part? And what if that's the little part, that one tiny part that you're identifying with, that's actually causing all the dysfunction in our world? And so if you can't be willing to question that, it's like, well, who's the robot? Do you know what I mean? Like what if we could be robots that could not only program ourselves to live like in the best possible way, but we're also actually here and experiencing it and aware, and we're also making choices. Like, wouldn't you have to be able to make a choice to say, well, I'm going to live not from the principle of just going what feels good, but let me instead live firstly, primarily from the point of what's best. And then let's make sure also feeling good is a part of that. Like, so you can be a robot, but also have free choice. Yeah. Ask it.
It's like, that's the question that will come up is like, hey, like if we said something like what people might interpret that as like, if we're robots, why don't we just program ourselves to live the best freaking lives for everybody? Everyone's like, but if we don't have free will, what do we have? It's like the whole point that we were making at the start is that you following your emotions is you not exercising your free will.
Right.
It's like
your will isn't free.
Straight up.
It's not. It's directed into what makes you feel okay. I mean, we just go down the rabbit hole, guys. all of you have seen The Matrix, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. The machines were using human bodies to generate electricity.
Right.
Okay. The problem with that story is it's like projecting the machine outside of us. It's like us versus them. It's actually like a form of racism, isn't it? It's like there's the humans and then the other race, which is the robots, right?
Yeah.
It's like the evil ones, right? But if you look at it for yourself on an individual basis, you're using your own body's physicality, its structure, to generate emotions and feelings that you want to experience. So you're actually, in a way, like enslaving your own body to be the producer of feelings for you. And then you don't even look at how by doing that, you're participating in a system that provides avenues for you to live out those feelings. For example, I want to watch this movie, or I want to eat this food, or I want to wear this kind of clothing. And there's people because they're also in the same economic system, who are like, well, I'm going to make a company that caters to these certain people's desires for experiencing themselves in this way. But isn't the point, like, there's like this kind of mythos of like being an entrepreneur where it's like, I think it's actually sort of a story that entrepreneurs tell themselves, like, we're here to change and do good and help people and all this stuff. The reality is you just want to make fucking money. Like, let's just be honest. You just want to make a lot of money. You want to have a private jet. You want to do all these things, right? Okay. Because everyone always says, when I become rich, then I'll really make a difference, right?
Yeah.
But but let's just take that and say, okay, let's not throw it out though. Let's say, well, what if the point of being an entrepreneur really is to actually improve the world? Well, how come nobody's like, well, it's actually not nobody, but let's just say hypothetically within what people are aware of, right? Nobody, let's say, is like, well, let's create products and things that actually make the world better and make it so that people have what they need. Do you see what I mean? And so, in other words, the actual real, the thrust of being an entrepreneur is to improve the world. So you can still have that thing. You can still be an entrepreneur. You can still have following your bliss and all these things as a thing that you get and you get to have an experience. But what if there's a way to align it with, okay, but let's do that and create things in a way that actually changes the system, changes it, not fixes it, changes it, so that it operates from a set of principles where it's best for everybody. And so, put your time and your effort towards that. Yeah. So
to give an analogy as an exemplar of what Cameron was saying earlier about how it's like we're taking away from our physical body just in order to like have an experience or a feeling that only exists inside of us, right? I remember I thought of this one day when I think it was after we chatted, and I was like, oh shit. And I was challenging myself. I was kind of like tripping out inside of myself because I like campfires.
You're like, what?
Campfires. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Campfires. Got it. Okay.
Campfires, right? And I was thinking about that, and I was like, whoa. Because, I was reading like the blogs and things like that about how we extract from our physical body to have this one-time fleeting experience. And we're just like, I want more, And I was thinking about it's the exact same about how we go and we have a campfire and we will burn physical wood for the fire and warmth and that experience, which is only for that experience. Like, why, if it's for warmth, then why don't we just stay inside when we have furnaces and like we already do that? You know what I mean? Or if it's to have a good time with your friends, it's like, yeah, it's just to have a good time with your friends. That's it. As in, imagine a tree was like a human being or like a race of people. And we're like, we're going to take this tree and we're going to chop it up and like burn it just so we can be like, like let's like roast marshmallows over here, even though we can just have them at home over like the stovetop or whatever. And it's like, that is the example. And I'm not saying don't have campfires and campfires are evil. It's just an example to imagine that that's what's happening in your physical body. It's like you are burning like a material that was once alive just in order to create some kind of experience inside of you that will be gone, that will not exist anymore, and nothing else. And it's equal to the way in which we draw upon this world and extract from it just for our personal gain, not really considering like, I mean, imagine if oil was like blood to the earth,
Hey, my grandpa is an engineer and he told me that is what it is, but okay. That's another episode now.
Yeah. Like, how far are we going down the rabbit hole?
I want to interject here because Cam, you were saying like, what if you could align, doing what's best for all with your entrepreneurship, like actually bringing something that's best. And I just want to make it really clear, like that is what we're suggesting here. That's what we're suggesting with this podcast. Is it's not like a what if, like as in a hypothetical. It's consider this as a point. Yeah. It exists.
That is what we're doing.
That's what we're directing. Yeah, within this podcast. Yeah.
Very good. Nice. And so,
also, Asif, on that point, it's like I think this is where you're going with it. It's like, look at the world system, look at the economic system. It's doing that to people. It's using us as the fuel for the fire, so to speak, of just generating.
Think about this. It became very apparent to me when I was living in Brazil and they were preparing for the World Cup, and then they had the Olympics like 2 years later, and they had all of these workers put in all this energy into building these stadiums, one in the middle of the freaking jungle, and it gets all built, and they had, I think, 8 games at one of them where everyone floods in. They spend all their money. They're looking forward for years and years. Sometimes it's the experience of a lifetime to show up and see a World Cup game. And then a month or two later, the game's over. People won the award. They celebrated. Most of them have cried anyway, because I don't know, out of 32 teams or whatever, 31 lose, and those people feel devastated. And one of them wins, and they celebrate, and they get drunk in the streets, and it's a momentary experience. And now there's a giant soccer stadium. There's, I don't know, they made 8 or 12 of them all around Brazil, and most of them are just homes for like birds and animals and stuff. Like, it's not even used.
Wow.
What? So that's a great example. That is a great example, Mitch. That's an amazing example.
And think about this, you know, in terms of that, it's like, it's not just so people can have that experience. It's so that the companies that are the sponsors, like the beer company or the footwear
Coca-Cola
company or whatever, can advertise to you, sell to you. But what are they using as the draw is the fact that all these people want to have that experience, like you said. So if people didn't care about that, like in other words, do I want to have great experiences? Absolutely. Like, no one's suggesting like, oh, we should just sit around and be very serious all the time. Yeah. Nothing is ever fun. Like, we have lots of fun. Like, we go all over the world, we hang out, we have a great time. Just even with my own family, we have a great time. But are you putting that above what's the consequence of what you're not only participating in today or tomorrow, but what is it, the system that we're accepting and allowing that, you know, at the end of the day, when I leave here, nothing's going to change. I mean, is that really what we want to leave? It's like, or are we going to have fun, you know, enjoy ourselves, but also put our efforts towards what's required to make the system in a way so that it's best for everybody? And you know what? A lot of times doing those things are not fun, but it's not because doing what's best is not fun. Because even if you're not doing what's best, like Mitch, you talked about this on the first episode. You were an entrepreneur before you came to all this stuff that we're doing now. Being an entrepreneur is fucking hard, and you have to do a lot of stuff, you know, getting up and going to the gym kind of stuff where you don't feel good just to even make money. And that's not even from the principle of doing what's best. That's just from the principle of I'm trying to make money. So it's not like I don't want to do what's best because then I'll never have fun or anything. It's like, you're not having fun all the time anyways. The only people who are having fun all the time are the people at the very, 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 very top of the system. And that's the whole point that we're saying is like, the only way for your life to always be fun is like, let's make that possible. Let's make that a reality for everybody. Because then you never have to worry like, well, what is going to happen to me? Like think about it. Do you know if there's going to be food in the supermarket tomorrow? Well, I mean, we just all went through this whole coronavirus thing, right? And I mean, there was times where we would go to the supermarket and there wasn't any bread. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like my wife was learning how to bake bread. Like seriously, she was even looking to like buying like wheat grinders to grind her own flour and stuff, which you couldn't even get because they were all sold out. So even the system that we think is just taking care of us all the time seems a little bit unpredictable, actually.
So one more key point, and then we should jump into like the real essence of principles. Is like we have this kind of emotional amnesia or energetic amnesia, where it's like when things are bad and you're feeling like something bad happened that day, you're like, fuck, I'm depressed or I'm pissed off or life sucks. It's always been that way. It's always going to be that way. Nothing can fix it. Like, this is just how life is, eh? Like, everything bad happens to me all the time. And the next day or 3 days later or the week later, right, you'll be like on the beach or just hang out with your friends.
Feeling great.
Like, you know, and you'd be like, oh man, life is so good. Like, I really do have the best life. You're happy with your job and like, you know, you're partying. You're like, oh my God, man, life was such an amazing thing. You know, I've always been happy. Somebody to challenge you. Like, are you always happy? I'm happy. Are you kidding me? I'm always happy. Things are always good. Like, what do you mean? You know, and things are always going to be like that. And nothing really goes wrong. I always come out of things on top or whatever.
Yeah.
And you completely forget about how yesterday or 3 fucking hours ago, you just got in a fight with your boss, or you're pissed off at your boss, but you can't tell them because you need a job, right? Or whatever the case may be. It's like, you just push that aside and like, forget about it. What we'll dive into later that I'm just going to plant a seed on is your focus on if you care about making a lot of money, so you have financial freedom, your focus on feelings is why you're broke. And when I say broke, I don't just mean, you know, you're making $1,000 a month. I'm talking about the reason why you even have to think about money still.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's even within the system as it is. That's
yes.
true. Because so if you're allowing your emotional up and down to influence your decisions in business, I mean, I was thinking about why you were saying that. It's like think about a phone. How do you think the phone feels when it's fully charged? And then it starts to drain, and then it's at that point where it has no more battery left. And then you charge it back up, and it's like, yeah, I feel good now. So like what you're describing is literally like a machine that's running out of energy. It charges back up, which is like the World Cup, right? So imagine like the whole world collectively, like we're all kind of like getting low. So they have every 4 years, another World Cup. Whoa, we're all doing this and making all this money and everything.
Olympics. And, yeah.
But if you really start studying I'm sure we'll have the conspiracy series within the podcast, but if you study the economics, it goes through these cycles. If you study, just the way economics moves, it's the same thing. It's up and down. Doesn't it make sense? Like it's a reflection of us. It's a reflection of what we're each participating in and so forth. And so even the people who are, quote, in charge of the system, they're doing the same thing, just in a different way. They're experiencing this big up and down and crash and high and all this stuff. They just have the discipline to not change what they're doing. That's the big difference. And so, when it really comes down to it, is those of us who want to make a difference in this world, we're going to have to become disciplined like that too. So we're really going to have to put our real focus on this whole point of, okay, feelings are feelings, principles are principles. If I follow my feelings, then I'm going to go up and down, and I'm never consistently applying something long enough. Because the way the true elite in this world, the elite of the elite, let's say, the way they really operate is they think about things in terms of like 100 years. So if the stock goes down tomorrow, they're like, I mean, okay, like it's not, plus, they have ways of insulating themselves and making money when it goes down and all this kind of stuff too, right?
But to make practical what Cameron's saying in your life is like, if you wonder why, sometimes you save up a lot of money, you make a lot of money, and then you don't have money, and it's constantly that, like, you're like, oh crap, things are tight. Or why your relationship goes well sometimes, and then it's like not going well sometimes. Or sometimes you feel lonely, or sometimes you feel so loved by everybody around you. It's like, if you think of a wave like that, right?
Yeah.
You feel good and you feel bad. You feel good and you feel bad. And that's why everybody says, isn't life just like a roller coaster?
Yeah.
It's like we're kind of aware of it, but not really. You know what I mean?
And Kian said that on the first episode, right? Where he would take out these teams of salespeople and so forth, and they get the bonus money, they'd go spend it, and they'd come back like totally drained and like at the lower point than they were before, which just keeps them coming back to get the bonus again and so forth. What were you going to say, Drake?
I was going to say, so why should someone choose to live by what's best for all? What would be the purpose of that if it's not to feel good?
Well, I'll give my answer, but I want to hear what you guys have to say first. It's a good question.
From my perspective, I got so sick and tired of those low points and just going through the ups and the downs. And I'm very grateful that I saw it fairly early on in my career, that it was like, no matter how much more money I made, it got better. Oh, how, great the vacation was, whatever. It was like, I would still cap at a certain point and then go down, and then you're just chasing that next high. Mm-hmm. And I, at a certain point, realized there has to be a better way. Now, here's the really cool thing. When I did meet you guys and learned about the principles and actually took them on and said, you know what? I don't quite understand this best for all thing, but I definitely want what's best for myself. And yeah, I want what's best for everybody. I may not know exactly how that is going to go down, but then I studied even more of what Cameron's talking about, the material from Destiny and reading the blogs, doing all the writing, and applying the principles. And now I have a feeling of unshakable bliss that's like always in the background. So even when the shit hits the fan and we lose serious amount of money on something, or I face rejection time and time again, or there's this big blow up and I get blindsided, I am unshakable. In my core, I know I'm gonna make this thing work, and I have the right people around me from the self-perfected community that if everything's falling apart, we're still gonna take it to what's best. And it will come back again, and I'll have the moment where the clouds part and I'm like, oh my God, it's gonna happen. And then I'll still have times where the doubt comes in. It's that feelings and energy and all that. It's like, oh, no, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. It's like, no, breathe, be here, direct myself.
Can I ask you, like, why are you going to make it happen? Like, as far as, because it seems like you got a really cool result, and I just want to make it more clear just from what you're saying, because you're like, well, now I've got this feeling of bliss in the background, right? But then it almost seems like you're still talking about feelings, right?
Yeah, so it's because the starting point is life. It's the reality that I'm here, you're me in another life. We're all here equal. That's the starting point. The bliss just happens. I don't really care about the bliss. I mean, yeah, sure, it feels good, but I also have times where I feel bad. But that doesn't matter.
That's not going to change what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
What normally happens is that people, they try to do what they think is like principally good, live by a principle. But when things get tough, they resort to like what feels right. And like, let's just go back to comfort mode. Like, let's stop trying to build a business or stop.
Well, that is their principle.
Yes, exactly.
That's what we're trying to say is like, you're thinking like, oh, I have these principles, but they're not actual, real, sustainable principles. Actually, what you care about is feeling good. And that's why. So for anybody who's like, well, I don't agree with that. I have principles and I don't give a shit what you guys are saying. Like, they don't have to listen. But for those who are like, okay, hold on, there's something here. This is why, just like you said about making money, this is why it comes and goes. This is why when you make a decision to get up early in the morning, you at one point don't, because you're just doing things based on how you feel and you're not supporting yourself to push past that. I want to real quick, before we even go into any principles or anything more, because Mitch started opening this point up. This is not well, I'm not saying it couldn't be, okay, but this is not how I experienced it, where I just make the decision, living by principle, not going to listen to my feelings. And then suddenly, I'm like floating around in a fucking cloud. Okay. So like, don't get it twisted, right? Meaning it is a process. Now that's different than saying it's a journey. Okay. So let's put the context in there. So you could use the word journey, but the way that tends to be defined is like, why do people say life is a journey? What they're really saying is the roller coaster, like you were saying, Asa. They're really just saying it's the up and the down, it's the back and the forth. Like there's no actual direction you're going. So they say it's a journey.
Some things will work, some things won't work.
Right. And it's like, in other words, they're not holding themselves accountable. But a process is like, there's steps, there's procedures, there's an end result I'm going for. So it's a process. And I really want to emphasize that now, because we're going to be recommending specific, not just ways of looking at things, but specific things to do, specific techniques, processes, tools, technologies, things, actual specific things. But within that, it's the constant application of them. It's the consistency. It's the always going back to that. Like you said, Mitch, like, sometimes I feel bad, but then I breathe, like that most people are not even taking that for granted. And they might be thinking, well, yeah, you breathe, which is really, and for most cases, you're just suppressing that bad feeling. And then you got to do something in some way to make yourself feel better. But there are ways where you can breathe and you understand, like, for example, self-forgiveness, which we'll get into, self-correction. There's a way of looking at it and a way of processing things within yourself where you make the changes and then you prove to yourself that you've changed it. And therefore you don't have to think about it again. But if that situation does come up, you know what you're going to do. And you might have to walk through it when it's hard, and you do it enough where you don't have to think about it anymore. Just like I don't think about walking. You know, and my daughter's 1.5. She's just now she still falls down sometimes, you know, like versus my son who's 3.5, who rarely falls down when he's walking around. Like he doesn't really trip that much. She'll even just fall down on her back sometimes and cry. She's still, her body's still learning to automate that point of just balance and like self-awareness of surroundings and so forth. So it very much is a process, but I'm not saying that from the perspective of, you know, oh, therefore, you know, you'll never get there. Because some people think that it's like, all I can do is just keep trying. And I don't know if it was on the first podcast or it was another conversation we had, but somebody brought up this point of like, do any of us think that we're perfect? And we all kind of were like, well, no, not yet. But that doesn't mean that that's an excuse to not perfectly apply a point. So in other words, when a situation arises and I have that choice to either go with how I feel or what is best and really work it out, stop, slow down, breathe, look at everything. Don't speak until I'm clear on the point, which there's ways in which you can support yourself, tools and so forth to get clarity on a certain thing before you make a decision. You can apply yourself perfectly within that. So within a moment, you can do it perfectly. So it's not about like you have to wait and then someday you'll be perfect. It's like, am I perfectly applying myself or not? But that being said, as you walk this process, the end result is you fully, completely trust yourself. You're always going to do what's best. Anyone else could trust you, not because you say it, but because you've proven it. It's consistent. Just like for a long time in the US, in my entire life, we always trusted there'd always be food in the grocery store. And then what happens this year? There's no toilet paper. There's no bread. Maybe people resorted to wiping their ass with the bread. I don't know what the specific thing was going on with the bread and the toilet paper, but there was some supply chain things where now we're like, oh, wait a second. Maybe my security is in question here. Right? And we can either all go into a bunch of fear and like, you know, it's black versus white, or it's man versus women, or gay versus straight, or trans, cisgender. Like we can go into all these different things. But at the end of the day, my message, our message is let's look at things in a way that's best for everybody. Where if somebody has a preference that you can work out is not harming anyone, it's not taken away from anybody. There's no reason why they shouldn't be able to have that preference. But we need to have a new standard, like you said, Asif, a new mode of being where it's not acceptable to be okay with, I got my opinions, I got my right to free choice, therefore I can do whatever I want. And if someone else doesn't like it and it hurts them, who cares? You know, and you ever hear this thing where people say like, well, I think everyone should have a right to do whatever they want as long as they don't hurt other people.
Right.
But who's willing to actually question themselves? Like every little thing you believe and think and feel, does it actually hurt somebody? You say, well, I've never hurt anybody. Okay, but you're using money. Does money hurt people?
Yeah, you bought Nike shoes. They have
you got Nike shoes on, and they got child slave. You know all this stuff, right? So it's like, how far are you willing to push yourself within this concept? We talked about the first principle being what's best for all, and this leads me into the second principle. I have to click on here. The principle of self-honesty. Now, since we're going to have it on the website, instead of reading it, because anyone can just read it, why don't we just talk about what's your perspective on, who can summarize your perspective of what is self-honesty?
And just to finish up the last point that I was making about how when things get tough, people resort to their feelings and just being comfortable again. Yeah. What Mitchell was saying was that because he's walked this process that Cameron was talking about of applying these tools, these techniques, these technologies for a certain amount of time, where even when Mitch feels all the feelings, he actually resorts to his principles. He goes back to his principles as the foundation. And it's the perfect transition because everything that we're talking about requires the second principle.
Right, exactly.
You have to be honest about the problems that are going on in this world. Yeah. You can't do this bullshit of just turn off the TV. Don't talk about this stuff. Then it's not there. Just focus on the positive, because the more you focus on the negative, that's what creates it. That's not what creates it. It's not you thinking about there's homeless people. That's what makes homeless people. Right? It's not you thinking about, oh, I don't have a good relationship. That's not why you have a bad relationship, right? Or not the best relationship. And it's a great point to focus in now, because I would say the three things that you need to change is first, self-honesty. Second, self-forgiveness. And third is self-correction or application, self-correction. And the reason, we'll just look at the first two, self-honesty and self-forgiveness. If you are super willing to forgive yourself, which we have, the process for that, you're super ready. Like I'm ready to let go of all the things that I've judged myself for and judge other people for. But there's nothing wrong with me. I'm great. I'm perfect as I am. And everything in this world is great. It doesn't fucking work. Because you're not willing to be self-honest. And if you're totally just self-honest and you're like, this is what's wrong with me, this is what's wrong with me, this is what's wrong with me, I have this problem, things, this is bad, and you're not willing to forgive yourself, well, you're just going to want to blow your brains out. You're going to go into depression.
I think that's why people get stuck with not wanting to be self-honest. There's multiple reasons, but I think one of those is you don't want to be honest with yourself because you don't know it's possible to forgive yourself. In other words, okay, I just want to read the definition because I'm looking at it, I'm like, no, it gives a lot of context. Right?
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Reflecting on myself and seeing every part of me, the good, the bad, and the ugly, without bias or judgment, so that I can take responsibility to change that, which I no longer accept and allow. And, obviously I would suggest to read these as we're talking about them, but it's that point of judgment. You see what I mean? Like, oh, I can actually not judge myself. I can forgive myself. I don't have to, just because something isn't best within me, immediately judge myself and feel bad about it. And then that's where it ends. So it's like, if someone doesn't even realize, like, okay, wait, there's a solution here. If I find something within myself that is actually not best, like I could see it for myself, really, then I could do something about it. I don't have to just continue to accept it. And this is where, I'm not going to blame religion, because it's not about like, you're accepting it. You're allowing this if you are. But religion is a sort of a system of programming people with this belief that you have original sin. Therefore, you are flawed. And the reality is we're all born into this world and we're all programmed by a world that's not best. So yes, to a certain degree, we all have some culpability in some way for what's going on. Even if it's just accepting it and not saying anything. And there's much deeper ways, like we've been talking about, living from the principle of, or the point of just only caring about what you feel. That's a major way in which every single person on the planet, even if you're poor, is still participating in this. Only difference is maybe someone who's poor can't take as much responsibility in the situation they're in the terms of the bigger picture, but they can still take responsibility down here, right? But again, it's all of us or none of us. We can't just be like, well, the poor person just takes responsibility. The rich people don't have to do anything. That's not going to change anything either. But this point of being able to forgive yourself and not accept that just because I have accepted things that aren't best, that it has to stay that way. Because I think the concept of original sin, because I'm looking at my upbringing and being in Catholic school and all that stuff, it gives people actually a very convenient excuse. Like, I am the way I am because that's how it is. Like, we're created that way. It's just a part of who we are. And somebody had to die as a sacrifice. And then I said these words and now everything's okay. But I don't have to change anything of how I operate based on the fact that I'm sinful or whatever the thing is. It's just this concept that needs to be addressed or something, where it's like where we get into not actually being honest with what's really going on, not actually taking responsibility. Right. But I don't know if that's a point you guys want to expand upon or not, but at least how is the principle of self-honesty make sense to you guys?
Mitch, I remember when the beginning of our relationship, where it was like, I had mentioned, and it was really in practice for the first time with you explicitly, because I've been realizing this with my brother, that I was like, hey, Mitch, if we want to advance our relationship the fastest, if you want to advance as an individual the fastest, and same for me, it's like we have to be as honest as it possible with each other. And you did that expertly.
Yeah.
So please.
Yeah. Well, because I realized that dishonesty wasn't improving my life. And it's like, when you're being dishonest, and it takes a process, right? Like, you're not going to be able to even handle perhaps being completely 100% honest with yourself right now. But the next step, you can always see that next layer of the onion, so to speak.
Yes,
so every time I would hop on the phone with Asif or Drake or Cameron or other people in the Self-Perfected group, I had learned to just be brutally honest, brutal self-honesty, realizing like, wow, I set this goal and I don't think I'm making progress to it, because you can see I'm not making progress. It's clear. And that willingness to be honest allowed me to grow, because now I could actually see the point that had to be worked through. And that's so basic, but are you doing it or are you not? Because to know and not to do is not to know. Meaning, if you know you should be more honest, you could see why it'd be beneficial to be honest. Even if you just start with yourself, maybe you journal a page in your notebook of like, hey, I've been lying to myself about thinking that I'm going to lose weight, and I'm clearly not, doing what's required to do it. Start there. And then we'll get into these tools, which are other principles like self-forgiveness and all that, which then can empower you. Because then it feeds into itself. After I started learning about self-forgiveness and realizing that it worked, and seeing just how quickly it worked and how I actually shifted, then I was even more willing to be self-honest. So it's really cool how it all feeds into itself. But it all goes back to that first decision of, are you even willing to do what's best for all? Or do you not even give a fuck?
Well, that's the real question. I'm glad you said that, because if you're not starting with principle what's best for all, then what are you actually being honest about? So I want to ask, whoever wants to take this point, what's the difference between self-honesty versus what most people think of as honest versus dishonest? Like what we would call, system honesty, or being honest in this. For example, a guy his family's starving. Okay. There's bread in the store. He goes in, steals the bread. Okay. He gets caught, charged with a crime, put in jail. Was he being honest?
Yeah.
According to the system
he was not being honest because he didn't pay for the bread in that sense.
Right. And the guy who is the owner of the company or the store, the CEO, whatever, who puts him in jail, is he an honest guy? I mean, assuming you don't know anything else about him.
Yeah.
Technically, he's following the law.
The guy who works at the store, right? The guy who's going to at the store every day, who gets the money and he buys the bread. He's the honest guy, right?
Yeah.
But do we have a system that, based on your education, based on your upbringing, your emotional stability that you got from your parents, maybe if you were abused or not, all these different things determine your ability to make money in the system? And hey, you're not following the rules. That's not honest. So, but let me ask you guys, if you were in that situation with that father, where that father was at, and literally your only option, because you didn't have the education, a job, maybe you lost your job, whatever it is, your only option was to go steal the bread. Otherwise your children are going to starve because they haven't eaten in a week. Would you do it?
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't? And so that's where I see the difference between honesty and self-honesty. Now, if we can now imagine the person who's not even willing to be honest about that.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're one of the people who are like, no, I would find some other fucking way. Like, obviously it's a hypothetical. Or
they say that guy's he's a criminal. Like, he should be put away. They don't even consider.
If you were in that position.
No. Right, exactly. How to actually, so that's being honest about ourselves. If I was in that situation, which is very difficult, especially if you are very emotional, you go based on your feelings. What's going to happen is that feeling of, I would never do that because I'm a good person. Now your definition of yourself, which is that feeling of good versus bad, is interfering with. So this is where we have to bring it back. Okay, hold on. What's best? To actually look at this objectively, so that, because if I make a mistake in my logic, then I'm only going to keep creating poverty, which means that guy's going to keep stealing the bread. He's going to be put in that situation. So if I'm not honest about it, I can't solve that problem. No one can solve it. Okay, so is that best? Then honest about myself, like, oh, I'm actually having a feeling right now. I'm actually thinking like I'm a good person. Well, what does it mean to be a good person? Okay, let me be honest about that. Where did I hear about that? Who did I learn that from? You see what I mean? So we have to look at the starting point of, am I going just based on my feelings, or am I actually going to be honest that I'm having a feeling? That's the first point of self-honesty just in itself, which, going back to what we're saying, starting with this whole podcast or this episode rather, principles versus feelings, is going to require some self-honesty for you to consider that. What do you want to add to that, Asad?
It's like people will use, well, he just needs to make an honest living, or I get you need to make an honest living, as a cover up for doing an abusive job. Like, Cameron, you brought up this example in the past of, like, the person in good faith who's just a family man, and he's an engineer. He did his degree as an engineer, and he works for, a fighter jet manufacturer. And in the system, it's like, yeah, like, that's cool. Like, he's making his money, and he went to school for
Raytheon, makes lots of money. He worked hard. Yeah, exactly.
He needs to provide for his family, but you're creating the fucking weapons of war. But that's okay. That's okay. It's an honest living.
He's just an engineer. He doesn't control what they use the bombs for, you know?
Yeah. It's like,
and somebody else would do that job if he wasn't there. You know, it's like, we'll be honest about that, but we won't really take it to the, yeah, that's a great, why is that guy honest? Just because he follows the rules. And here's somehow I think, I want to see what you guys think.
But first I want to go back to that first point that you're saying of why you have to start with the first principle of being focused and having as the Polaris star, the number one as do what is best for all. Oh my God. Is that like a scary screenshot that I'm going to get like Illuminati for?
The Illuminati holding
gosh, I'm in trouble now. But if that's your number one, doing what is best for all, then you use your self-honesty to direct you in that regard. Where if right now you're in a position where you're a single mother, single father, or you're just not in a practical, real position to, let's say, leave that engineer job, still take care of your family, and do something that is much, much better for the world, right? The self-honesty is to say that I know this is not the best thing. This is abusive. You know, if you're still drinking alcohol and things like that, it's like, be honest with yourself. You don't even like really fundamentally. Okay, well, that might be a stretch, but look at where you're at in terms of alcohol and why you're actually doing it. You might not be at a point right now where you can drop it and you won't think about it ever again and you're totally cool, but it starts.
You start questioning it.
Exactly. You have to say, what would be best for my body? What would be best as a mode of being, right? What would I want for somebody else, right? And then you use self-honesty to direct yourself to that point. And that's why principle is so important, is what you come back to always when the feeling's not there, or when you're unsure and things like that.
You know, it'd be really great. We could do sometime. Sorry, Jerry, I'll just add this point. You know, have like people in the self-perfected group give us topics, like you said, alcohol. You know, it could be like pornography. It could be, you know, clubbing, like all kinds of stuff that people do. And we can break down, like, why is it not actually best? And why do people do it? You know, stuff like that. So that would actually be really cool to see people practical examples. Sorry, Drake, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think it makes sense as far as like, it answers the question that I had earlier of why would somebody want to do what's best for all? Because it's actually best for you as well.
Yeah.
You know, to have a system that is providing for everyone that has food, then nobody's stealing from you. Nobody has any reason to steal food from you because they have all their needs met, you know, and obviously there's more to it than just that. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out. Like, why would somebody want to start doing what's best for all? Because it includes you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's not just a moral point of like, I want to be a good, it's like,
and also you don't have to sacrifice, you don't have to sacrifice yourself. Oh, well, like I want to do what's best. Yeah. Everything.
If we're honest with ourselves, we can admit we're already all sacrificing ourselves for this system that we live in anyways. Like, nobody lives forever anyways. Like, who do you want to be? Who do you, not just like
what are you giving your life force?
Yeah. Like, what do you want to stand for? What do you want to represent? What do you want to accomplish? You know, like, do you really want to do what's best for yourself? Because if you were objective about your life, you would realize like, oh, this would be best for me if the world was better. Like, that should be obvious. But again, we aren't taught, we aren't educated in a way where these things are obvious. Otherwise it would be obvious. Did you want to add something else? If I know you were.
Does anybody else have to add on that point of self-honesty and
no, I mean, we're coming up kind of on time, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Because the last thing I wanted to, I guess, kind of leave everybody with is that definition of character that we got from Kevin Trudeau and Global Information Network. Because it's really looking at what you just said is like, what character are you accepting of yourself? And a definition of the word character that we kind of all live by is character is and remember, we're talking about it from the perspective of feelings versus principle, right?
Yeah.
Character is following through on a decision long after the excitement or the emotion of the moment has passed. And here's the truth. In this world right now that we live in right now, not what it could be, but right now, we are responsible for the direction. All this chaos is going to come to some sort of structure that governs the rest of this world. It's going to instill some new principles into people or into the system that it operates on. And is it like we're going to suppress everybody and make sure that we're all separate and make sure that we're all like held in place?
Yeah.
Maybe. But it's the sense of urgency about you taking responsibility for your own life, for me taking responsibility for my own life, and Mitchell and Cameron and Drake and Kian, my brother. It's like what we stand for is that the truth is, if we adopt the new mode of being, the next evolution of mankind, because this is what it's really about. We became, Homo erectus, right? We could stand up, and then we could think. And now we're like aware that we're thinking. That was the next evolution to mankind. And now the next evolution to mankind is being the greatest thinkers, being the best, and programming ourselves for that. And that's what self-perfected is about. And what we're suggesting is if you follow feelings and principles, you'll never actually get any clarity in this world, because you don't know where your feelings come from. You don't know what's driving you. You don't know why it's happening. And you can't share that with other people. If you don't have children, or you do have children, you're not going to be able to explain to your children why you do what you do, because you're just following a feeling.
Yeah.
And what we're suggesting is a set of principles, which is if you follow that link, self-perfected.com/principles. These are the principles that we're referencing. And there's a reason why we spent a lot of time on the first two, because they're the most important. Is principles is something that we can all follow. And that's what unites the four of us, including Kian as well.
Yeah.
So that's what we're suggesting is the new mode of being that will take you as an individual to the heights of your life, better than what you can even conceive of right now, which is what we've all been experiencing. Is like, oh, damn, I didn't know life can get this good, right? And so as opposed to what you might be experiencing right now in your life.
Yeah, and I think we'll just close with this point. Another point to look at with principle is that it's your starting point, but your starting point determines your end point. So if your starting point is simply just feelings, what we're really saying is that that's an up and down that always ends in down. Like the energy is always going to run out. The honeymoon is always over at some point. But if your starting point is principles that consider what's best for everybody, we can put systems in place that give everybody what they need. And then we can get on with the business of being creative for real, like living our actual bliss instead of trying to find something we're passionate about. And when you look up the word passion, do you guys know what that really means? If you look it up, the Greek, it just means suffer. The word passion means suffer. So let's not we're going to have to suffer because we're in a world where we don't have what we need. But let's make that suffering not in vain and actually create a world that's best for everybody. Maybe that can happen in our lifetimes. Maybe it's going to take generations. Does it really matter at this point? Do we have a choice? Or do you really want to do what's best for yourself? Mitch, where can everybody find out more information about our group, our website? You want to hit them with all that stuff?
Yeah, it's real basic. So self-perfected.com. And from there, you'll get a link to everywhere else, which is our Facebook group. You can find more episodes of the podcast, get tapped in, get free resources, and share that with other people. Because like Asif and all of us are saying, this is really about the next evolution of mankind. And from Homo sapien to, we call it Homo perfectus.
Yeah, perfectus. I like that. That's good. I love
that.
Yeah.
Homo optimus. Yeah.
Because it's realizing that none of us are just some isolated individual. We're all literally interdependent. Yeah. So that is the next evolution of humanity, where then we learn to give as we want to receive, and we do what's actually best for everybody. So on that note,
100%.
For those of you who can hear this message, join us. Keep coming back for more episodes, and get involved in the group, because there's a lot of people from all around the world already working on this, and you'll be surprised. All right, everyone. Thanks for being on. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
See
ya.